Royal Guard kicks down basement door after hearing muffled screams. Captain Elias Moore had always believed that a day on duty at the palace would be predictable. The corridors were polished to a shine, the guards marched in their precise formations, and the life of the palace seemed almost timeless. There was a rhythm to everything, the way the bells marked the hours, the way the scent of fresh flowers drifted through the main hall, and the way the lamps were lit as the sun dipped below the horizon. Elias liked the order of it all. It gave him a sense of purpose, and he took pride in the role he had served for nearly a decade. This particular evening began like any other. The golden sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the palace, catching the intricate patterns of the marble floors. The corridors were quiet, save for the occasional echo of footsteps. Elias walked steadily, his polished boots making soft thuds against the stone. He had been tasked with a routine patrol of the palace grounds and interior, a duty he took seriously, even when it seemed monotonous. As he passed the grand stairwell leading to the basement, he noticed something unusual. A faint sound, almost imperceptible, seemed to rise from the shadowed corners of the palace below. He paused, straining his ears. At first he thought it was the wind rattling the pipes or perhaps the echoes of distant maintenance work. Yet the sound persisted. It was not random, it had a rhythm, a pattern. It was the unmistakable sound of muffled cries, soft, strained, and urgent. Elias' heart quickened. He knew the basement well. It was a seldom used area, usually quiet and locked, housing old storage rooms, maintenance equipment, and occasionally staff who needed to access the deeper parts of the palace. But it was never meant for anyone to linger there alone. The muffled sound sent a ripple of unease through him. He glanced around. The corridors were empty. None of his fellow guards were near, and the distant echo of the palace bells marked the passing of time. Could it be a stray animal? He muttered to himself, trying to calm the sudden tension. But no, the sound was too human, too desperate. A shiver ran down his spine, and a deep sense of responsibility anchored him to the spot. The palace was supposed to be a safe place. It had always been, and if someone was in danger, it was his duty to act. Elias approached the stairwell cautiously, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of his ceremonial sword. It wasn't yet necessary to draw it, but the gesture gave him reassurance. Step by step, he descended into the dimly lit basement, the air cooler and heavier than above. Dust particles floated in the thin beams of light from the wall-mounted lamps. The familiar scent of old wood and stone mixed with a faint metallic undertone that made him uneasy. As he reached the bottom, the sound grew slightly louder, though still muffled. He stopped, listening intently. It was coming from one of the doors at the far end of the basement, a door that led to a storage room, long locked and rarely opened. Elias knew the door well. It was old, heavy, and reinforced. Normally it remained untouched for weeks at a time. Yet tonight someone was inside. He knocked on the door softly, calling out in a firm but calm voice, "Hello." "Is someone there?" The muffled cries continued, unbroken, and seemed to grow slightly more urgent. Elias' stomach tightened. This was no longer a minor concern or an oddity of palace life. Someone needed help, and time could make the difference. Elias stepped back, surveying the area. He considered his options. Calling for backup was one, but he knew the longer he waited, the more time the person inside might suffer. The palace was vast, and even a short delay could be critical. He trusted his instincts. If he acted carefully and quickly, he could assess the situation and prevent further harm. The muffled cries tugged at his conscience. Memories from earlier in his career flashed through his mind, times when hesitation had cost someone dearly. He couldn't let that happen here. The responsibility weighed heavily on him, but he felt the familiar rush of focus that came with his role. Elias had been trained to act decisively, to prioritize human life above protocol. Tonight, that training mattered more than ever. He reached for the handle of the door, testing it. It didn't budge. His suspicion deepened. This wasn't a normal scenario. Whoever was inside didn't have the ability to open the door themselves. Elias' mind raced as he tried to figure out the safest way to proceed. He couldn't waste precious moments debating. The cries continued, a heartbreaking mix of fear and relief that someone was near. Elias' training kicked in. He scanned the surrounding area, noting the layout and possible exits. The basement was narrow, with walls lined with shelves and storage boxes. There were no immediate threats visible, just shadows and silence beyond the door. He squared his shoulders, took a deep breath, and reminded himself why he was there. Duty wasn't about comfort or hesitation. Duty was about protection, about acting when others could not. He knocked again, louder this time. "It's okay, I'm a guard, you're safe now, I'm going to help you." The cries faltered for a moment, then resumed. That brief pause was enough to confirm for Elias that the person inside was real, frightened, and possibly injured. His resolve strengthened. There was no alternative. He would have to enter, even if it meant force. Elias stepped back, preparing himself mentally. He knew the door was old but sturdy. His training told him exactly how to approach it. One powerful kick, aimed at the lower part of the door, could give him the access needed without injuring the person inside. He positioned his boots, took a careful breath, and kicked. The door shuddered under the impact. The muffled cries turned into a startled gasp, and then a brief silence fell. Elias' heart pounded. He waited a moment, listening. There was no immediate response from anyone else, which meant the area was still empty. No additional threats, no complicating factors. He kicked again, harder this time. The heavy wood splintered slightly, and a small crack appeared, enough for him to push it open. The sight that greeted him was enough to pull him fully into action. Inside the dimly lit room was a young palace staff member, sitting on the floor, clutching themselves, wide-eyed and shaking. Their fear was palpable, and their relief at seeing Elias was immediate. Thank you," they whispered, barely audible. Their voice trembled, a mixture of exhaustion and gratitude. Elias crouched slightly, keeping his voice calm and steady. "You're safe now, I'm here to help." "Can you stand?" The person nodded weakly, leaning on a nearby shelf for support. Elias guided them carefully, mindful not to cause further injury. Every movement was deliberate. Every word was measured to convey reassurance. As they made their way to the main basement corridor, Elias' mind raced with questions. How had this happened? Who else might be involved? Could there be more people in danger? But for now, the immediate concern was the person in front of him. They needed safety, care, and calm. Elias led them toward the stairwell, keeping alert to every sound, every shadow, every possibility. By the time they reached the first floor of the palace, Elias had already contacted the senior staff and medical personnel. The staff member was taken to a safe room, wrapped in a blanket, and offered food and water. Elias remained nearby, attentive but restrained, ensuring that they were fully supported. The tension in the room slowly eased, though the gravity of what had occurred lingered heavily on his mind. Elias stepped back into the corridor, taking a deep breath. The palace was quiet again, but nothing would feel the same. The evening that had started with routine footsteps and polished floors had transformed into a moment of courage, decisiveness, and human connection. Elias understood that duty was never just about protocol. It was about listening, observing, and acting when it truly mattered. He walked back toward the guardroom, his boots echoing on the marble floor, feeling the weight of the night settle around him. This was a day he would not forget. The faint sound of muffled cries had led him to a situation that tested his training, judgment, and heart. And though the palace would continue its rhythms, its bells, and its polished floors, Elias knew that one life had been changed forever because he had chosen to act. The night air settled over the palace as he returned to his post. The shadows seemed quieter now, but his senses remained alert. Elias understood that vigilance was never a simple matter. It required presence, care, and the courage to step into the unknown. And tonight he had done exactly that. The palace was quieter now, but Captain Elias Moore's mind was racing. He had helped the staff member, but the questions would not wait. Who had locked them in the basement? How had no one noticed earlier? And most importantly, was the threat truly over? Elias knew better than to assume safety. Danger often hid in the smallest cracks of even the most familiar places. He returned to the basement door, now broken from his kick. The wood was splintered, and the lock lay twisted on the floor. Elias examined it carefully, trying to piece together what had happened. The damage was consistent with someone deliberately locking the door from the inside, or someone using a key to prevent the person from leaving. The idea chilled him. This was no accident. Someone had intended harm. Elias' training took over. He began to check the surrounding basement area. Shelves, storage boxes, and old furniture could hide anyone or anything dangerous. He moved slowly and deliberately, stepping over the scattered debris from the door and scanning every corner. His eyes were sharp, his ears alert to the smallest sound. The muffled cries had stopped, but that did not mean the situation was over. "Hello. Is anyone else here?" he called softly, his voice echoing in the empty space. Only silence answered him. He waited, listening for even the faintest movement, a shuffle, a cough, a whisper. His instincts told him that someone else might be involved, and he could not ignore the possibility. As he moved deeper into the basement corridor, he noticed small signs that suggested more than just a trapped staff member. There were scuff marks on the floor, faint fingerprints on dusty surfaces, and traces of hurried movement. Someone had been in a rush, or had been forced to act quickly. Elias crouched to examine a trail of footprints. They were small but distinct, leading toward a back door that connected to the maintenance wing. His mind worked quickly. He could follow the trail immediately, or he could call for backup. He knew calling for backup could delay action, but going alone could be risky. Elias weighed the options carefully. He was trained to prioritize human life, but he was also trained to avoid unnecessary danger to himself. After a moment, he decided to proceed carefully along the trail, alert but steady. The maintenance wing was darker than the basement. The lamps flickered, and the air smelled faintly of oil and old machinery. Elias' footsteps were soft against the concrete floor, but he moved with purpose. The faintest sounds, pipes creaking, the wind against the building, kept him alert. He imagined the trapped staff member's fear, and it pushed him forward. Every second mattered. As he turned a corner, he noticed a door slightly ajar. A faint light spilled through the gap. Elias paused, listening. There was nothing yet, no movement, no voices. He prepared himself to enter. One wrong step could alert whoever had locked the staff member in the basement, or it could put him in harm's way. He moved forward slowly, pushing the door with his shoulder. The room was empty, but signs of a struggle were clear. Chairs were overturned, a small table was scratched, and papers were scattered across the floor. Elias examined the scene carefully. The evidence suggested that whoever had been here had left quickly, probably after realizing that someone had discovered the basement. The realization brought a mixture of relief and tension. The immediate danger might be gone, but the person responsible was still in the palace somewhere. He called for backup, keeping his voice calm but firm. "This is Captain Moore. Basement situation confirmed. Suspect may still be inside. Proceed with caution." Within minutes, additional guards arrived, their presence offering support but also adding pressure to act efficiently. Elias briefed them quickly, outlining the evidence, the possible paths the suspect might have taken, and the location of the trapped staff member. The backup team spread through the palace in a coordinated search. They checked corridors, stairwells, and service areas, moving quietly but deliberately. Elias stayed close to the basement exit, ready to assist the staff member and ensure their safety. He reassured them, explaining that the situation was being handled and that they were no longer alone. The staff member nodded, their hands trembling slightly, but their trust in Elias was evident. While the search continued, Elias reflected on the chain of events. The palace was supposed to be secure. Every corner, every hallway, every entrance was monitored. Yet somehow, someone had slipped through and committed a harmful act. The thought was troubling, but Elias focused on the practical task at hand: ensure the safety of everyone and uncover the truth as efficiently as possible. The search led them to a side corridor near the kitchen. The area was dimly lit, and the air carried the faint scent of food and cleaning supplies. Elias noticed a door that was slightly open, the hinges creaking softly. He motioned for the team to approach quietly. One guard peeked inside and reported that the corridor was clear. Elias inspected further, noticing footprints similar to the ones he had found earlier in the basement. They led to another door at the end of the corridor, a door that opened into a small storage area. He paused before entering. There was a faint rustling inside, like someone moving quickly. Elias signaled to the team to stay back, drawing on his training to assess the situation carefully. With steady hands, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was empty, but it was clear someone had been there recently. Shelves were disturbed, boxes were open, and a small personal item lay on the floor. It was enough to confirm that the suspect had been in this area but had left in a hurry. Elias took a deep breath and relayed the information to his team. "The person we're looking for was here. They're moving quickly. Keep an eye on all exits." The guards nodded, following his instructions carefully. The palace was a labyrinth with countless corridors and rooms, but Elias' knowledge of the layout gave him an advantage. He guided the team through the passages, keeping them focused and efficient. Meanwhile, the trapped staff member was being comforted in a safe room. They were offered water, blankets, and a quiet space to rest. Elias checked in on them periodically, ensuring they felt secure and informed. His presence, calm and attentive, helped ease their fear. The staff member began to recount the events that had led to their confinement, providing details about the suspect and the circumstances. Every word helped Elias piece together the timeline and the intentions of the individual responsible. As the evening wore on, the palace remained on high alert. Security cameras were reviewed, and every possible access point was monitored. Elias coordinated with the other guards to ensure no one could enter or leave without being noticed. The combination of vigilance and strategic action created a sense of control amid the uncertainty. Elias also reflected on the emotional toll of the events. The fear, the desperation, the relief, it all weighed heavily. He understood that his role was not just about physical security, but also about the emotional reassurance of those in danger. Being a guardian meant balancing logic with empathy, decisiveness with patience. He felt the gravity of that responsibility more strongly than ever. Hours passed and the search continued methodically. The suspect had not been found, but evidence suggested they were moving cautiously, trying to avoid detection. Elias reviewed the paths they might take, considering motives and opportunities. He communicated with the team continuously, adjusting strategies as new information emerged. The palace, usually serene and predictable, had transformed into a landscape of uncertainty, and Elias navigated it with unwavering focus. By late evening, the immediate danger to the trapped staff member was fully mitigated. They were safe, calm, and receiving proper care. Elias ensured that they were comfortable and informed, reinforcing trust and security. Yet he remained vigilant. The situation was not fully resolved until the person responsible was identified and removed from the premises. The night stretched on, filled with quiet observation, careful investigation, and the constant hum of alertness. Elias moved through the palace like a shadow, aware of every sound, every movement, every detail. He understood that vigilance was both exhausting and essential. Each step, each decision could have profound consequences. And in the quiet moments, he allowed himself a brief reflection. This was why he had chosen this path, why he had committed himself to the role of protector. The palace remained, as always, a symbol of order and tradition. But tonight, it also became a testament to courage, responsibility, and human connection. Elias' actions in the basement had prevented harm, restored safety, and created the conditions for justice. And though the night was far from over, he felt a quiet resolve. He would not rest until every threat was addressed, every life protected, and every lesson learned. The palace was unusually quiet that night. Even the usual distant hum of activity seemed to fade into the background as Captain Elias Moore moved cautiously through the dimly lit corridors. The staff member was safe for now, under the care of other guards, but Elias knew that the situation was far from over. Someone had locked a person in the basement, and whoever it was could still be inside the palace. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing on his shoulders like never before. He retraced his steps to the maintenance wing, reviewing the clues he had gathered so far. The scattered footprints, the overturned boxes, and the faint personal items left behind all told a story of haste and careful planning. Whoever had done this knew the palace well. Elias' training kicked in as he considered the possibilities. The intruder could be a staff member with access, someone who had studied the palace routines, or an outsider who had found a way in. Each scenario required a different approach, and there was little room for error. Elias moved through the hallways with quiet precision, signaling to the backup team to fan out in a coordinated sweep. He checked every side corridor, storage room, and passageway. The palace was vast, with hidden corners and stairwells that could easily hide someone who wanted to remain unseen. He had to be methodical. He couldn't allow haste to turn into oversight. The faint creak of the floor beneath his boots reminded him of the silence he had to maintain to avoid alerting anyone. As he approached a corridor near the old servant quarters, he noticed something he had not seen before, a narrow vent near the ceiling, partially covered by a faded tapestry. Elias' eyes narrowed. The vent was too small for most people to fit through comfortably, but it could have been used to listen or even to escape if someone had inside knowledge. He made a note to check the entire ventilation system later. For now, his focus remained on accessible spaces. Suddenly, a faint sound stopped him in his tracks. It was a soft shuffle, barely audible, coming from the far end of the corridor. Elias crouched slightly and listened. The sound repeated, a careful, almost hesitant movement. Someone was there. He signaled to the nearest guard, who nodded silently, and they moved forward in tandem. Every step was deliberate, measured, ensuring that no sudden noise would reveal their presence. As they reached the source of the sound, they found an empty room, but the signs of recent activity were unmistakable. A chair was knocked over. A broom lay on the floor as if dropped in a hurry, and footprints led toward a small service door at the back. Elias knelt to inspect the footprints more closely. They were similar to the ones he had followed earlier, confirming that the same person had moved through this area. The footprints led to the service door, which opened into a narrow corridor leading to the kitchen wing. Elias motioned for the team to proceed cautiously. They moved in a quiet line, aware that any sudden sound could alert the intruder. As they rounded a corner, the muffled sound of a door closing echoed softly behind them. Elias froze. Someone had just moved through the building, and it was likely the same person who had locked the staff member in the basement. The adrenaline in his veins heightened his focus. Every sense was on high alert. The corridor ahead led to a small storage room near the kitchen. Elias signaled to the team to halt at the entrance. He pressed himself against the wall, listening carefully. There was no sound now, only silence. But the room showed evidence that someone had been there recently. Shelves were disturbed, and a small bag lay on the floor. Elias picked up the bag and found it contained a few personal items, perhaps dropped in haste. His mind raced as he considered what this meant. Whoever had been here was clever and cautious, but also human. They had left traces. Elias directed the guards to check the surrounding corridors while he inspected the room further. On a low shelf, he noticed faint scratches and scuff marks. They suggested that someone had tried to hide or climb in a hurry. The realization struck him. The intruder was trying to avoid capture, but they were moving too quickly, making small mistakes that revealed their presence. Elias' instincts told him that the next move would be critical. He radioed the rest of the team quietly. "We have evidence here. The suspect is nearby and likely using service corridors to move undetected. Secure all exits and continue searching systematically." The guards responded promptly, their voices calm but alert. They fanned out to monitor all potential exit points, ensuring that no one could leave unnoticed. The palace, usually so orderly, had become a labyrinth of tension and uncertainty. Elias returned to the service room, examining the bag once more. Inside, he found a small notebook with scribbled notes, a pen, and a few identification cards. The notes were confusing at first, filled with names and numbers that did not immediately make sense. Elias set the notebook aside for later analysis, prioritizing the immediate need to find the intruder. Every second that passed without locating the person increased the risk to everyone in the palace. He paused, considering the next steps. The corridors in this wing led to several key areas: the kitchen, the staff quarters, and a rarely used side exit that led to the garden. The intruder could be hiding, waiting, or planning an escape. Elias knew that careful observation and patience were essential. Acting too quickly could result in the person fleeing or causing harm. He decided to use a combination of stealth and coordination, relying on the team to cover all possible routes. As they moved forward, Elias noticed a faint shadow near a corner. He froze, signaling the team to halt. The shadow moved slightly, then vanished behind a partially closed door. Elias' heart pounded. The intruder was close, too close to ignore. He approached the door slowly, hand resting on the hilt of his ceremonial sword for reassurance. The door was slightly ajar, revealing a narrow stairwell leading down to a storage area beneath the kitchen. Elias took a deep breath and pushed the door open gently. The stairwell was dark, and the air was cooler here. He descended carefully, listening for any sound. Halfway down, he noticed something on the floor, a small piece of fabric, torn and slightly damp. It matched the clothing of the staff member he had rescued earlier. His mind raced. Had the intruder taken someone else? Or was this simply a piece of clothing left behind in haste? He continued down the stairs, signaling to the guards to follow. At the bottom, the corridor branched in two directions. One path led to the old wine storage room, the other to a maintenance exit. Elias chose the left path, toward the wine storage room, hoping to intercept the intruder. The faint smell of aged wood and wine filled the air, but there were no sounds yet, only the tension of waiting, the quiet pressure of uncertainty. As they approached the storage room, Elias motioned for the team to spread out. They entered slowly, checking each section of the room. Shelves lined the walls, filled with bottles and boxes, creating shadows and hiding spots. Elias signaled to a guard to check the far corner, and as the guard moved, a soft noise, a sigh almost imperceptible, echoed through the space. Elias' eyes widened. Someone was here. He stepped forward, raising his voice calmly but firmly. "This is Captain Elias Moore. You are surrounded. Come out safely and no one will be harmed." The silence that followed was tense, almost unbearable. Then, from behind a stack of boxes, a figure emerged slowly. It was the intruder, young, nervous, and clearly frightened. Their hands were raised slightly in surrender, their eyes wide with fear. Elias remained calm, observing the person carefully. He noted their posture, their expressions, and their hesitations. He knew that this moment required patience and careful handling. Any sudden action could provoke panic, leading to unpredictable consequences. He took a step closer, keeping his voice steady. "You do not need to hide anymore. You are safe, and we are here to ensure no one is hurt. Please follow my instructions." The intruder nodded, slowly lowering their hands. Elias instructed them to sit on the floor and stay still. One guard stood nearby, keeping watch, while another secured the stairwell exit. The intruder's fear was evident, but their surrender marked the turning point. The immediate danger was contained. Elias could finally assess the situation and begin understanding why this had happened. He spoke gently, asking simple questions to gain information. The intruder revealed that they had acted impulsively, driven by fear and confusion. They had not intended serious harm, but had panicked when trapped in a situation of their own making. Elias listened carefully, balancing discipline with empathy. He understood that while accountability was necessary, understanding the human context was equally important. By the time they returned to the main corridor, the intruder was in custody, and the immediate threat had been neutralized. Elias felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. The night had been long, tense, and demanding, but the palace was secure once again. The staff member remained safe, and the intruder had surrendered without harm. Elias took a moment to reflect. The events of the night had tested his training, his judgment, and his patience. He had acted decisively, but he had also remained calm, observant, and empathetic. The palace, usually a symbol of routine and tradition, had become a place of challenge and courage. And through it all, Elias had demonstrated the qualities that defined a true guardian: vigilance, responsibility, and care for those in danger. By the time dawn began to creep through the tall palace windows, the tension of the previous night still lingered. Captain Elias Moore had not rested. Even though the immediate danger had been contained and the intruder was in custody, his mind was occupied with questions that needed answers. How had the incident started? Why had the intruder acted in such a way? And were there any other risks that had been overlooked? The palace staff were shaken but grateful. Many of them had never witnessed anything like the events of the previous night. Whispers moved through the corridors, a mix of relief and lingering anxiety. Elias moved among the staff, offering reassurance and gathering information. He understood that part of resolving a crisis was restoring confidence, not only in the safety of the palace, but in the people entrusted with its protection. The intruder was escorted to a secure room where they could speak with the palace authorities. Elias followed at a respectful distance, knowing that his role was to support the investigation without interfering. The room was quiet, with soft lighting and minimal furniture. The intruder, visibly nervous, fidgeted with their hands as officials began to ask questions. Elias observed closely, noting every hesitation, every nervous glance. The person was clearly frightened, not only by the consequences of their actions, but also by the overwhelming environment of the palace itself. Through careful questioning, a story began to emerge. The intruder, a former staff member with limited access to certain areas, had panicked when confronted with an unexpected situation. They had intended to retrieve a personal item from the basement storage area, but had become trapped when the door accidentally locked behind them. In their panic, they had tried to hide and move through the palace unseen, creating the appearance of deliberate confinement of the staff member. Elias listened attentively, piecing together the timeline. It became clear that while the intruders' actions had caused fear and confusion, there had been no malicious intent to harm anyone. They had acted impulsively, driven by fear and compounded by poor judgment. The distinction was subtle but important. Understanding intent would determine how the palace handled the aftermath and what measures would be taken to prevent similar situations. With the immediate story clarified, attention turned to the logistics of the incident. Security footage from the previous night was reviewed carefully. Elias and the security team watched each frame, noting the intruders' movements and the responses of the palace staff. The footage confirmed what Elias had already deduced. The intruder had moved quickly, trying to avoid detection, and had left small but significant clues behind. Every overturned chair, scuffed floor, and misplaced item now made sense in the larger context of the night's events. Elias also reviewed the palace layout, checking for any weaknesses that might have contributed to the incident. The basement door had been old and somewhat difficult to lock properly, a flaw that had played a role in the confusion. Several access points in the service corridors were not monitored as closely as the main entrances, allowing the intruder to move without immediate detection. These findings prompted discussions with palace management about improving security measures, including better surveillance, updated locks, and more frequent patrols in less used areas. While the investigation unfolded, Elias continued to check on the staff member who had been trapped. They were calmer now, wrapped in a warm blanket and sitting in a quiet room. Elias spoke with them gently, encouraging them to share their experience. "It's okay now," he said. "You're safe and we're making sure this doesn't happen again." The staff member nodded, their hands clasped tightly together, their eyes still showing traces of fear but also trust. Their account of the events helped Elias and the authorities understand the chain of mistakes that had led to the night's crisis. The staff member explained how they had been going about their usual duties when they suddenly found themselves trapped in the basement. They had tried the door, called for help, and even knocked on nearby walls, but no one had heard them initially. The stress of being confined, combined with the fear of being alone in the dark, had made the situation feel far worse than it might have otherwise been. Elias could empathize. He had felt a similar tension when he first heard the muffled cries. It was a reminder that fear could escalate quickly, even in familiar surroundings. Once the accounts were gathered, Elias coordinated with palace officials to ensure that everyone involved received appropriate support. Counseling was offered to the staff member, both to address the emotional impact and to help them regain confidence in the palace's security. The intruder, meanwhile, would receive guidance to prevent future incidents, including instructions on proper procedures for accessing restricted areas. Elias understood that resolving the situation meant more than enforcing rules. It required education, support, and reflection. As the morning progressed, the palace began to return to its usual rhythm, though the events of the night remained fresh in everyone's mind. Guards maintained a heightened level of vigilance, patrols were doubled, and access points were carefully monitored. Elias took note of every adjustment, every lesson learned, and every opportunity to improve safety. He felt the responsibility of leadership acutely. The safety of the palace and everyone within it rested in his hands, and he could not take it lightly. During a quiet moment, Elias walked through the basement again, taking in the empty corridors and the broken door. He considered how a few small factors, a locked door, a sudden panic, and an unmonitored corridor, had combined to create a serious situation. It reminded him that even the most secure places required constant attention and care. He made mental notes for improvements: better lighting in the basement, clearer signage for emergency exits, and more frequent checks of less used areas. By midday, the authorities had completed their preliminary assessment. They determined that the incident, while serious, was ultimately a combination of fear, poor judgment, and inadequate security measures. No one had been physically harmed, and the intruder had surrendered peacefully. Recommendations were made for increased training, improved communication, and enhanced monitoring systems. Elias was involved in every discussion, ensuring that the lessons of the night would translate into tangible improvements. Despite the resolution, Elias could not ignore the emotional weight of the situation. He had witnessed fear, courage, and relief all in a single night. The staff members' trust in him and the successful containment of the intruder had provided some satisfaction, but the responsibility of leadership lingered. Elias understood that safety was never guaranteed. It was earned through vigilance, empathy, and decisive action. He spent the afternoon walking through the palace, speaking with staff, and checking on security measures. Each interaction reinforced the importance of awareness, patience, and compassion. The staff member who had been trapped expressed gratitude multiple times, their voice steadying with each conversation. Elias reassured them, emphasizing that their experience would lead to improvements in procedures and safety, and that their courage in enduring the situation had been noted. By evening, the palace had returned to a sense of calm. The intruder had been removed from the premises under the supervision of authorities, the staff member was safe, and the security adjustments were underway. Elias reflected on the events of the night and morning, recognizing that the crisis had revealed both weaknesses and strengths. It had shown the value of training, teamwork, and quick decision-making. Most importantly, it had demonstrated that even in moments of fear and uncertainty, courage and responsibility could guide actions toward a positive outcome. Elias walked through the main hall one last time before taking a break. The golden light of sunset filtered through the windows, casting long shadows on the polished floors. It was a quiet, reflective moment. He considered how easily routine could be disrupted, how quickly fear could escalate, and how critical it was to remain calm and focused. He knew that the lessons of the night would shape future decisions, and that the palace would be stronger for the experience. The staff, guards, and officials had all learned something important. Safety and security required constant attention, understanding, and vigilance. Mistakes could happen, but how they were addressed made the difference. Elias felt a quiet pride in the way everyone had come together, in the way fear had been transformed into action, and in the way responsibility had guided decisions. As he left the palace for the evening, Elias allowed himself a moment of relief. The immediate danger was gone, the intruder had been dealt with, and the staff member was safe. Yet he knew that vigilance would always be necessary. Safety was never a permanent state. It was an ongoing effort, built on awareness, care, and courage. And Elias was committed to that effort, ready for whatever challenges might come next. The palace was quiet in a way it hadn't been for a long time. The sun rose higher in the sky, spilling warm light across the polished floors and ornate walls. Captain Elias Moore walked through the main corridors, his boots echoing softly, carrying the weight of the previous night but also a sense of calm. The immediate danger had passed. The intruder had been removed, the staff member was safe, and the palace's security had been reassessed. Yet Elias knew that true resolution required more than a return to routine. It required reflection, learning, and a renewed commitment to vigilance. Elias paused near the grand stairwell, thinking about the events that had unfolded. The night had been long, tense, and exhausting. He had faced uncertainty, made quick decisions, and acted to protect others. The courage required was not about heroics or recognition. It was about responsibility. It was about responding to cries for help, listening carefully, and acting decisively, even when the path forward was unclear. Every step he had taken had been guided by that principle, and it had made the difference between fear and safety. The staff member who had been trapped in the basement had begun to recover emotionally. They walked through the palace corridors with a newfound sense of calm, no longer hesitant or afraid of every shadow. They had been offered counseling, reassurance, and time to adjust back to normal duties. Elias spoke with them occasionally, offering a steady presence, answering questions, and listening patiently. The trust that had been built between them during the crisis remained strong, and Elias felt a quiet satisfaction in seeing them regain confidence. Meanwhile, the palace had begun implementing new security measures. The old basement door had been repaired and reinforced. Surveillance cameras had been checked and updated, and new procedures were introduced for areas that were rarely used. Guards had been given additional training to recognize early warning signs of unusual activity, and communication between staff members had been strengthened. Elias oversaw the changes carefully, ensuring that every adjustment was practical, effective, and sustainable. The lessons of the night were being translated into lasting improvements. Elias also reflected on the intruder's situation. While their actions had caused fear and confusion, it was clear that there had been no intent to harm. They had acted impulsively, driven by panic and fear, and had compounded the situation through poor judgment. The palace authorities had ensured that the intruder would receive guidance, counseling, and support to prevent similar incidents in the future. Elias understood that accountability did not always mean punishment. It sometimes meant education, awareness, and the opportunity to learn from mistakes. As the day progressed, the palace slowly returned to its usual rhythm. The gardeners worked quietly in the courtyards, the kitchen staff prepared meals, and the guards resumed their patrols, alert but calmer than the night before. Elias walked among them, observing, supporting, and occasionally offering guidance. He noticed the small ways people were adjusting: a careful check of doors, a more attentive ear for unusual sounds, a sense of reassurance in knowing that the captain and the team were vigilant. The palace felt safer not only because of improved security measures, but because of the awareness and confidence instilled in the people who lived and worked there. Elias spent time reviewing the night's events in detail. He noted what had gone well, what could have been done differently, and what lessons should guide future responses. He prepared a report for the palace authorities, outlining the situation, the intruder's actions, the response of the staff and guards, and recommendations for preventing similar incidents. He wrote carefully, ensuring that his observations were clear, accurate, and useful. The report would serve as both a record of the incident and a guide for maintaining vigilance in the future. Later in the afternoon, Elias walked back to the basement, now empty and quiet. The splintered door had been repaired, the room had been cleared, and the area was calm. Yet he could still feel the echoes of the night, the muffled cries, the fear, the adrenaline, and the urgency. He ran his hand along the railing of the stairwell, thinking about the staff member and the intruder. He thought about how small decisions, quick reactions, and careful attention had made the difference. He thought about how easily the situation could have escalated if he had hesitated, and how important it was to remain alert even in familiar surroundings. Elias understood that leadership carried responsibility beyond physical actions. It required empathy, patience, and clear communication. He had needed to balance authority with understanding, firmness with compassion. The intruder had been frightened and confused, the staff member had been terrified, and the guards had been anxious. Guiding everyone through the crisis required not only skill, but also emotional awareness. Elias had learned that being a guardian meant more than protecting walls and doors. It meant protecting people, emotions, and trust. In the evening, a meeting was held with palace officials and senior staff. Elias presented his findings, observations, and recommendations. He explained the sequence of events, the behavior of the intruder, the response of the guards, and the improvements that were already underway. The officials listened carefully, asking questions and offering their support. They expressed gratitude for Elias' decisive actions, his clear thinking under pressure, and his attention to both safety and emotional well-being. Elias remained modest, emphasizing that the success had been a team effort and that vigilance and training were key to any positive outcome. After the meeting, Elias returned to the staff members' room. They had been allowed to resume light duties, and he wanted to ensure they felt secure. They spoke quietly, reflecting on the events and the lessons learned. The staff member expressed gratitude, noting how calm and professional Elias had been during the crisis. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come so quickly," they said softly. Elias smiled and reassured them. "You were brave too. You stayed calm and followed instructions. That helped me and the others respond effectively." As night fell once again, the palace was bathed in the soft glow of lanterns. The events of the past day were slowly becoming part of the palace's history. Guards walked their beats with a heightened sense of awareness, but also a quiet confidence. Staff moved with calm purpose, reassured that their safety and well-being were a priority. Elias stood in the main hall for a moment, looking around at the familiar surroundings with a sense of calm reflection. The palace, resilient as ever, had weathered the storm, and its people had shown courage, adaptability, and trust. Elias' thoughts returned to the lessons of the night. He realized that vigilance was not about fear, it was about preparation, observation, and response. It was about noticing small details, listening carefully, and acting decisively when necessary. It was about balancing firmness with understanding, authority with compassion. Most importantly, it was about recognizing the humanity in every person involved. The staff member, the intruder, the guards, and even himself. Each had played a role, and each had contributed to the resolution of the crisis. He also reflected on the unpredictable nature of life within the palace. Even in a place of tradition, routine, and order, unexpected events could arise. The true measure of preparedness was not simply following rules, but being adaptable, responsive, and aware. Elias felt a renewed sense of purpose. He understood that his role was ongoing, that vigilance was continuous, and that every day could present new challenges. Yet he also felt satisfaction in knowing that when the moment demanded action, he had acted with courage, clarity, and care. Before retiring for the night, Elias made one final round of the palace. He checked doors, corridors, and stairwells, ensuring that all security measures were in place and functioning properly. He observed the calm expressions of guards, the orderly movement of staff, and the quiet confidence that had been restored. The palace felt alive and safe, but also resilient, stronger than before because it had endured a test of vigilance, quick thinking, and human courage. As he stepped outside into the cool night air, Elias took a deep breath. The sky was clear, and the stars shone brightly above the palace towers. He allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. The night had been long, filled with fear, urgency, and action, but it had also revealed the best qualities in people: courage, responsibility, empathy, and trust. Elias understood that these qualities were not just tested in crises, they were strengthened by them. He returned inside, ready to rest but also aware that vigilance was never fully complete. The palace would sleep, but its guardian remained alert, ready for whatever challenges might come next. The events of the past night would serve as a reminder, a lesson, and a guide. And in that understanding, Elias felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense of accomplishment, responsibility, and purpose. The palace was safe, its people were cared for, and its guardian was ready to continue his duty with renewed commitment. The crisis had passed, but the lessons remained. Elias knew that safety, trust, and preparedness were not moments, they were ongoing efforts. And in the quiet of the palace night, he felt confident that the lessons learned would help prevent future crises, ensure vigilance, and strengthen the bonds between the people he had sworn to protect.